panel discussion on diversity in the tech industry. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion that we're doing as a podcast for the Tech Trailblazers this evening. I'm delighted to welcome Nema Sampat, who is the founder and CEO of Contentstack, and also our joint female Tech Trailblazer of the year. Hi, Nema.
Hi, Rose. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And Dr Jacqui Taylor, who is the CEO and founder of FlyingBinary, which is a Tech Trailblazers alumni. And Jacqui is now one of our judges. So hi, Jacqui.
Hi, Rose. Great to be here.
Brilliant. And last but by no means least, Joe Baguley, who is the CTO for EMEA for VMware and also one of the Tech Trailblazers judge. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
So the topic that we're going to be looking at this evening on the discussion is around diversity in the tech industry, and that includes sort of obviously the wider conversation, so diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. Over the last many years, there are lots of headlines around the need for more women in technology and more diverse representation and, of course, inclusion in the tech industry. And I think we have come a long way. We're now seeing 20 of the top 100 influencers in the Silicon Valley and the bigger tech space, the 20 representing, which is leaps and bounds beyond where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And in the wider industry, I was just saying that Unilever has also announced that its board has reached gender equality. But the question is, the wider community is looking at these things. So we'll bring a variety of viewpoints here and everybody's own experiences and position on this. So now, as a winner of the Female Tech Trailblazer of the Year, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Could you just give us a little overview of who you are and, your background?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a entrepreneur first and also an investor in small businesses. And I come from for someone who's been running tech companies for most of my career, I come from an interesting background, which is probably why I find diversity such an important topic. But I'm obviously female, but also a non-technical CEO. I don't have an engineering background, but I've spent all of my career in tech and most recently 20 years in Silicon Valley. So I typically come from an interesting vantage point in beating the odds, which is why diversity in tech and more importantly, equality and leveling the playing field is so important to me. My current role is CEO at Contentstack, which is a modern technology stack for managing digital content. And we essentially work with a lot of large brands to help them do all the things that they wish they could do in a more modern way on the technology side.
Brilliant. Thank you. Welcome. And Dr. Jacqui Taylor, could you give us a little background on yourself?
Yes, delighted again to be here, and congratulations, Neha, on the award. That's fantastic. FlyingBinary is a Tech Trailblazer alumni. We came second, which I was thrilled with because it's like we were on our journey. And I'm now one of the top 10 global Internet of Things innovators, and 2 of those people on that list are female. So I think that where we've been in the digital world and been struggling with all of this, not true in my world. So I'm sure we'll talk about that, Rose. But I am an engineer. I'm an aerospace engineer, and my co-founder is an electrical engineer. And the predominance in our company is an engineering background. But because FlyingBinary provides part of the counter-terrorism tech stack for Europe, so we're in that space. But essentially for us, our agenda is an inclusion one. After teaming up with Tim Berners-Lee in 2009, we've actually built our tech stack for Generation Z, who are between the ages of 27 and 17 today, and we pivoted in January 2019 to serve Gen Alpha, who are 16 to 6 today.
Wow. Thank you, Jacqui. And Joe, welcome. Could you give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah, so I work for VMware, a large multinational or global software company. I think most people have heard of us. About 30,000 employees globally. We're Silicon Valley. We're Silicon Valley started. Silicon Valley headquarters still. Stanford, sort of born and bred for a larger number of us. I don't know what I can describe as. I've not got an engineering degree, but then what does that matter? I'm a techie. I'm an engineer. When it comes to diversity, I suppose I'm the typical, I suppose, white, middle-aged, privileged male, I think is the best way to put that. But the interesting thing for me, and we'll talk about that a bit later on, is the journey that I've been on at VMware, the journey that all of us have been on at VMware, in understanding diversity and inclusion specifically, and generally the power of that and how to unleash that. So yeah, I'm happy to talk a lot more about that on this podcast.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you, Joan. Welcome. So what does diversity and inclusion mean to you, Jacqui? Let's start with you first of all. And what are you seeing in the industry at the moment?
So for me, as I say, we've been focused on Gen Z and building our tech to unleash their talents. And often their approach to the world, and certainly to the online world, is radically different. They're our first generation of web entrepreneurs that essentially care nothing for our services and our institutions and our way of doing things, because they view most of them as broken, and they take quite a disruptive impact or view of our world. And my role has been to understand how we can use technology to enable that talent as opposed to fight against it. Many of the 27,000 CXOs who I represent, I'm an industry analyst, pretty much find that Gen Z won't work for them, or certainly they did when we started working together in 2016. And we've been understanding that conundrum as to not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, and some people can unleash their talents and work best in a corporate environment, providing that corporate environment isn't hostile to them. So for me, it's actually about the wider talent pool than just tech. It's everything that needs to surround it as an ecosystem. I personally am visually disabled. I don't normally talk about that, but I literally look at all the learning differences and the spectrum of 50 that we support to say, wherever you start, i.e. whatever learning difference you have, there is a place for you for tech to enable that, to bring your talent to the world. So for me, inclusion is about that broader spectrum, and gender, whilst it figures, it's not a key piece for me, because I think that the gender presentations are sort of mobile, or they're always changing, and therefore it's about how you learn and how tech enables the world to benefit, or society to benefit from what you can do.
Cool. Thank you, Jacqui. And how about you, Naya? How are you seeing things? I mean, you're on the other side of the pond from the other three of us. What's the landscape in the tech industry where you are at the moment, and what are you seeing and what it means to you personally? Because you've talked about what it means to you personally already a little bit. What's the landscape like over there?
I really love how Jacqui put it, in, just understanding where talent might live and how you learn and how tech might enable you. And that's something that we care about a lot at Contentstack, and what I personally care about. And the way I've built my companies and my team is really to look for tech in places that you might not expect it. A good example of that is actually our R&D office, which is an engineering team based out of India, is in a location that's pretty remote compared to where most people have set up Indian operations. And we've done this in a community that's in the outskirts of Mumbai, in a town called Virar. And what's beautiful about it is that there's really not a lot of other employers there in the tech space. And what we find is that there's a lot of talent. There's, of course, a lot of people. It is India and it is Mumbai. But the community colleges are cultivating teams of people that are coming out of colleges, young age, willing to work hard, but maybe not having access to the opportunities that they can prevail in. And so we look for talent in places like that and help cultivate that talent. And we end up finding some of the most brilliant engineers in the world as a result of that. So I have a strong belief that talent exists everywhere, and finding opportunities and leveling the playing field for that talent to come to fruition and to really have a place that they can do the best work of their career and feel significant in how they contribute and make an impact. That's really what makes me really excited. And what we're seeing in the US is that there's sort of this diversity of location that's started to happen, where everything used to be central around Silicon Valley. And there still is, of course, a lot of activity in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, but we're starting to see that a remotely distributed workforce is enabling that diversity of thought. And I'm actually sitting in Austin, Texas today, where I'm setting up my team, kind of our second hub in the US. And I find that I have people on the team in Austin that are musicians on the side, or actors or singers. And that in and of itself brings a different way of thinking to the company and to the way that we make decisions, because you're kind of unleashing this inner creativity and diversity of experience and backgrounds that makes people think differently and respect each other differently and care about customers differently. And so I feel like things are changing radically, and valuing diversity of experience and location is actually helping us to be a better company.
Great. Well, that's actually one of my questions later on, so we may return to that. But Joe, from your perspective, what are you seeing within a large corporation? But obviously, you do touch upon the startup world because that's part of your remit as a CTO as well. So, what do you see?
So I'd like to touch on diversity and inclusion as the definitions to start with, and it's been really important to us on our journey as a company and as leaders. The best definition I ever heard of diversity was one of our other leaders who described it as: diversity is inviting everyone to the party, but inclusion is making everyone feel like they can get on the dance floor. And I think that was probably the sort of pivotal moment for a lot of us a few years ago, because we're all kind of like, yeah, well, we've been hiring lots of diverse people, we've been looking at our diversity targets, and et cetera, but it was like, yeah, but to Jacqui's point and others, are they staying? Once they get here, do they feel like they can actually contribute? Do they feel like they're valued? Do they feel like they can be themselves and actually give what they were hired for? So for us, the focus has been very much about developing and expanding a culture that we already had of inclusion. We've run, there's almost a motto at VMware called Dare to Be, which is all about daring to be yourself. And people are encouraged to dare to be themselves and to do what they want to do and be what they want to do and bring their whole self to work. So for me, diversity and inclusion is defined by people feeling that they are included. And diversity covers everything. I think we've covered that very well. A lot of people tend to focus on gender or race, but actually for me, diversity talks about people who maybe come from different backgrounds, people who don't have a degree. Why do we have to have graduate programs? Why can't we just have, intelligent young people programs and maybe have different skills? Who are we excluding by having 9-to-5 jobs? Are there a whole second phase of, young, returning to work mothers that we're missing out on? All these categories, for example, I'm deaf. I'm wearing a hearing aid right now in my left ear. All these different categories. How do we enable everyone to be themselves? And so actually at VMware, we started a whole bunch of different things, but the biggest thing we've had is these things called Power of Difference communities, or pods. And so there's pods all around the world where it's, there's a Black at VMware, there's Latinos, there's Pride, there's women at VMware, there's veterans at VMware, and so on and so forth, where people of differing backgrounds can get together for communal support, but also to raise awareness in others that these kind of people exist. And you can join a pod if you don't fit into that pod, if that makes sense, to learn more. So I'm members of quite a few different pods that obviously I'm not in the category for, but it's a good way to learn and understand. So that was really important. You ally that with unconscious bias, which is one that a lot of people talk about. And unconscious bias isn't just about gender, it's about everything. 60% of our managers globally have been through unconscious bias courses, and we have a whole bunch of what we call change agents. There's several hundred, over 500, I think, of those globally. So, it's about driving a culture of inclusion, driving a culture of change. And, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm, a privileged white, middle-aged male, fairly well off, good background, etc. But the best and the most important thing I found going through all of this was another comment in one of the sessions is, if you look at a lot of the training that goes on in terms of diversity or unconscious bias, it tends to be shaming in some way. Let's get a bunch of men in a room and shame them about how they don't understand women, or let's get a bunch of white people in a room and shame them about how they treat Black people. That doesn't tend to work. And I think what we're finding now is people are saying, okay, privilege is fine. We should actually understand and not celebrate privilege, but privilege is okay as long as you use it for the betterment of others. So it's, yes, I have privileges, but as long as I recognize I have that privilege over others and make sure that others can benefit from that, then that's fine. So, the whole space is massively important to me. It's massively important to us at VMware. And, I'm quite proud that my colleague, Duncan Greenwood last night at the Every Woman UK Awards, he won the Male Agent of Change Award. And he actually runs diversity and inclusion at VMware and EMEA and is a member of the Inclusion Council. So, it's big for us. And it's not just about PR and all those kind of things or corporate social responsibility. We have had so many benefits because of it. And I've made a lot of interesting friends. And I'll give you the perfect example. I was out in Dubai recently at a conference, and there were a bunch of graduates there all manning the stand. And actually, there was all the boring old people, and the boring old people wanted to go for dinner. And I said, no, I'm going to go for dinner with the graduates. And we had the most amazing time at the Cheesecake Factory. And I learned a lot that I wouldn't have learned if I'd gone to dinner with all the boring old men that I would have gone to dinner with. So that kind of activity is what's really changed us and changed VMware, I think.
Great. Well, congratulations to Duncan. It's great. And this is interesting. It's one of the things that triggered me when I was at RSA last week, was I went to a great conversation, sort of inspirational talk done by a lady called Bobby, who's been at the Department of Homeland Defense and involved with a very high level cybersecurity stuff from the beginning, and a number of other ladies who are also very inspirational, come from a diverse number of backgrounds, looking at how they've been involved with the cybersecurity space. But in the audience was 90%, if not more, ladies. So are we singing to the choir a little bit too much in a way you touched upon? That is there a danger we can almost swing too far, that we are inadvertently in some way making people feel bad about stuff? And how can we avoid doing that? How about you, Naya? What do you think? Do you think we've got to be a little bit careful about this?
I absolutely do not feel that way. I feel like there's plenty of room for everyone to be represented. When there's women at a conference, they are probably more likely to pull in other minorities than the typical men's conference would do. I think that women open up the conversation to everyone. I was at a conference just yesterday in Austin. It was the JP Morgan Chase Power Her conference. And there were men in attendance, and they were raising their hands and saying, what can we do better? How can we help? And there was a lot of great examples of what companies are doing to help the men feel inclusive as a part of this better and greater function of reaching equality inside their workplaces and their communities and the ecosystems that they operate in. And so I actually think, no, we're not creating that silo or at any danger. I think we need to continue the conversation, and we need to be loud, and we need to scream from the rooftops. And it's not just about women, but it's about equity across the board.
Yeah, great. And how about you, Jacqui? You must get invited to a lot of women in IT conferences. You're recognised in a number of lists as influential women in tech, both in the UK and globally.
Yeah, I think for me, I've spent the last 18 months actually working at a global level, initially from a cyber point of view to look at global corruption, which was, I spoke on that at Davos in 2019, and the UK has an initiative to defeat global corruption as part of its post-Brexit plan. But I've recently, just back from the Middle East, having put a plan on the table for inclusion across the G20, which is 60% of the world's GDP. And if you can make a case for why inclusion matters, the case I made essentially is a 4.4% growth in those digital economies over the next 10 years. Everybody will listen, because this stuff has real value. And it was curious for me to be able to make that case in Saudi Arabia, which, given its background, its current culture, etc. One of the things I found very interesting is that 20% of all the new jobs in Saudi Arabia are taken by women, as women are starting to recognise where their where they think their role lies within a culture that's very different to ours in the UK. So for me, we've barely begun this piece, because we talk a lot about this in our Western economies, our evolved economies, but actually the rest of the world and places where I work, like Russia and Iran and places like that, China, it's not a conversation that you hear very much. So I was thrilled to be able to make that case for the G20, to be able to set the forward motion to be an inclusion agenda. And I like Joe's phrase around that, but the one I left the G20 with was leave no one behind, which means you have to know where everybody is. You have to be able to look at the opportunities that you're doing and know where it sits, and know who you have excluded, and have specific interventions. Now, obviously, you can't do one thing for the G20. You have to do specific interventions for each of the economies. But there was the golden thread of inclusion that actually was the foundation block for all of the economies. So I think that having just done that assessment across those nations, we are a long way behind, much further behind than we know. I think we have these conversations at organizational level. I think we have these conversations at sector level. The tech industry has always been good about that since we were that rabble in Shoreditch in 2009, where women were poorly represented, to today. But what we're not doing is necessarily having a nation conversation that actually recognizes the globalization movement that tech is underpinning. So we're not understanding the dynamics of that. So for me, that was the start of a new conversation, and I will be taking up my new position in the EU on the 16th of March, which puts that conversation on the table of inclusion, leave no one behind there. The EU is taking very seriously that new plan and plans to invest from a research and innovation point of view directly to achieve better outcomes for all of its citizens. But I think these conversations are just beginning. So for me, it's almost was a reboot for my Women in Tech role, and thinking about how we, in a globalized world, have these conversations that are amplified. And I think this podcast is one part of that. 3 diverse people, yourself as curating it, Rose, we need to have more joined up conversations, because our world is at societal level is becoming more joined up, tech being the enabler.
Absolutely. So, Naya, obviously as an investor as well, I mean, we've talked about within your company and how important, the D&I conversation is, and that's part of your DNA at Contentstack, and it's something that you're clearly very passionate about. Do you see that it plays a role for the strategic growth of your organisation as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many stats out there that demonstrate that having a diverse team, whether it's leadership or just across the board, has a positive impact on the bottom line of a company. And as a CEO, I think about that and really focus on building a team with that diversity and different backgrounds. But even more importantly, as an investor, it's also important to think about who is the team that you're investing in and what do you expect to get from them. And that diversity is something I look for when I invest in companies. And just to give you an example, we know that for large companies with at least one woman on the board, there's organizations that outperform their peers. And that's usually by almost 30%. And that's not arguable, right? We know that that's true. And so in our investments in the accelerator program I'm launching in India, I will require that there's a female on the founding team to even be considered. And those are the types of initiatives that start to move the needle towards a more level playing field. It's not so harsh that you are excluding everyone, but it makes it a little bit more inclusive and encourages everyone to start thinking about diversity as a tool to be more successful.
There we go. To have that equilibrium as being the fact, one of the key factors of getting that healthy organisation, which is fit to grow.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Joe, okay, a question for you, which has always been my view, that it is interesting that this conversation very much goes hand in hand with, or often in the same, not the same breath, but just there seems to be a parallel path between our attempts, and I'm talking about as countries, as organizations, as an industry, to plug our skills gap, that if we can get, getting enough people to be excited about being in our industry and then including them in the conversation so that you get this spread of positivity that hopefully encourages more people, is that a key part of the solution, do you think?
Well, looking across the whole workforce at a large software company, I think that there tends to be, stereotypes, without being too rude, women work in HR and marketing, men work in technology and engineering, it tends to be how it ends up. And I think breaking down those barriers is very important. I think what you're looking at, we talked about diversity for us. I want diversity in every team that we've got, but more importantly, we want to drive innovation. As a software company, as any tech company, you live on your innovation and you die on your innovation. And innovation doesn't happen particularly well in homogenous groups. It happens in very diverse groups. And for us at VMware, innovation isn't just about innovating in technology. It's about innovating in people, processes, how we go to market, pretty much every angle of our business, innovating in HR. We're innovating in our recruitment and in some really cool ways. So, it's looking across that, but those ideas will only come from a diverse set of opinions or a diverse set of backgrounds. The challenge you've got, and I've got two teenage girls, one 19, one 16, looking at sort of, their future careers. I took them into the office, and I now go back and do speeches at their school and other schools to open their eyes to what a tech company actually is. Because if you go and ask a 16, 17-year-old person who's looking to what they're going to study at A-level or college or whatever it is, and ask about tech companies, they immediately go, it's all about coding. It's all about development. I don't like coding. I'm not into coding. And then I take them into our office in Staines where there's several hundred people, not one of them a developer. They're like, what, and all these people work for you? Yeah, and all these people earn incredibly good salaries and have fantastic quality of life, but none of them develop code. Over there, that's the legal department. They're working on contracts. These people here, they're professional services, they're delivering stuff. These people over here, that's HR. This is marketing, so on and so on and so forth. There's education, so you name it. There's such a broad offering of ways that you can engage in a tech career without having to be a developer or write applications or work on the web or whatever it is. And I think that when we start to expose the variety of what we call normal office jobs that aren't, particularly well drilled into children, you go to school and you go to any careers officer and they tend to have a very blinkered view of, okay, what's my choice? Well, you would be a fireman, doctor, nurse, vet. You can be an accountant, or you can go and work in IT, which means you need to code. You're not very codey. Well, best not to do that one, etc., etc. That, to me, will help fill a skills gap hugely. Why do we have to have STEM degrees to come and work in IT? You don't. You don't need a STEM degree to work for a tech company. I did a study of the people that work for our pre-sales in EMEA, and I'm just trying to fish it out as I talk to you. But from the top of my head, over half of them did not have a technical degree at all. We had degrees in some fantastic things. If I look at it, we had, of the degrees, 25 people had technology degrees, 4 people had non-technology degrees, things like PPE and international studies and automobile product design, and 18 of our highest technical pre-sales people had no degree, of which 8 of those had no A-levels. So, you want to build the skills gap? Open the diversity of your recruitment and make people aware that they can get a job in this if they didn't even think they could.
I love that, Joe. I think that you're driving an important point home, and that whole idea of talent existing in places where we might not be looking for it. And now we've got this technology that makes everything so much more accessible that you can actually find that talent, give them access to what they need, and help them to cultivate a career around something that they might just be good at and maybe didn't even know existed.
Definitely. Jacqui, any final thoughts on the skills gap side of things?
Yeah, so I've taken with Gen Alpha, which is who we're building for now, 16 to 6. They're pretty much not interested in any of that particular conversation. So interestingly, what the 27,000 CXOs came up with is how do they stay? Joe made that point earlier. Even if they come work for us for Gen Alpha, not that they're at that space yet, but how do we put things in the place that they can stay? One of the intersections for that cohort, got 6,000 of those people offline last year to deep dive on this one, is an intrapreneur mindset. What they tend to have is they tend to have an entrepreneurial focus, which can be developed in an intrapreneurial way. So that innovation space actually allowing them to self sort of collaborate, and a little bit, as a Googler, the 20% days that we used to do, and actually allowing people to sort of self-federate and work on things. So I've got an initiative I'm building at the moment, which is where bringing 3,000 offline spaces to bear and allowing them to create and to develop and to do some teaching of the cyber safe initiative that I run for entrepreneurs, and allow them some grounding in that, and then fit them into local communities where they can bring some of that talent to bear, but with some entrepreneurial thinking. And the CXOs love that. They love that idea, but more than anything, Gen Z are more than capable of saying, you might love that, but you're not going to love this, but I want the chance to do that. We've got to unfold that initiative at the moment, but what we've done for Gen Z doesn't actually translate to Gen Alpha. So essentially the talents and skills in those two cohorts are quite different. And the Gen Alpha one that's the reason we've chosen to focus it, because we don't actually understand how best to enable their talents. And lots of the jobs that they will fulfill don't exist in the world. So whilst I was out in Saudi Arabia, for example, one of the things I was asked to look at was the first synth, the first artificial intelligence citizen of Saudi Arabia. How could that look when I was doing the plan for the kingdom itself? How does that integrate with this thinking? And so, for Gen Alpha, that's their world. We will be looking at jobs that currently don't exist, or they will create. So I think that one of the routes that we've taken with Gen Z will transfer, but I haven't got that program live yet, which is the apprenticeship model. We've got all the way up to level 7, which is PhD for Gen Z, and they just navigate that their own way. You can't tell them anyway. It's just via an interest and a passion and a willingness to get involved and engaged in something. So something similar to that, which can lead to a degree and doesn't necessarily fit within our university system in the UK, but I've got several universities that are running these as a parallel track, and they're funded by business. So at the moment, looking at how I evolve that model from Gen Z to a Gen Alpha model, where their likelihood is that jobs that they'll do will be very different. So I think because I've got that focus for diversity and inclusion on those two cohorts, it's a lot of experimentation, but their view of it is just give me room to explore. It's a discovery process mostly, but obviously the point of self-organizing them offline is to get them to meet with one another virtually or together, and also look at whether there are particular core pieces that we can enable. So do we need an intervention from a government point of view, for example, for certain parts of that sector? So some of the level 5 to level 7 parts of the Gen Z initiative, we've needed intervention, but it's actually bringing us a cohort of new nurses, for example, in our NHS. So fascinating stuff led by them.
Jackie, because we're talking about entrepreneurs, they're all entrepreneurs. They're not all entrepreneurs.
No.
Not everyone is an entrepreneur. So I think this constantly searching for entrepreneurs, I think is probably, not
intrapreneur.
Yeah.
Intra.
So intrapreneur.
So No, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about the entrepreneurs. But this particular skills gap that I've been looking at is the entrepreneur element of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and how that then enables them to take any route forward, because of the way they navigate the world.
Well, I mean, so entrepreneur is still, it's an entrepreneur, but within an organization. And that's my point. Not everyone is like that. Not everyone is that kind of person. So if we go searching just for those, I'm excluding a large section of society by just trying to talk to intra-stroke entrepreneurs. You know, I had a long military career, and I always used to wonder, you know, looking at why is that guy private yet he's still, you know, 20 years in the service. And it's like, well, some people just don't want to be that. They're happy doing what they're doing, and you have to have a place for them, and you have to have a support network for them, and you have to enable them. So, you know, I think this constantly focusing on entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs as being the future. Not everyone born after 2010 is going to be an entrepreneur or intrapreneur.
I agree with you, but the reason that the CXOs have found that they don't stay is that it's the entrepreneurs that are not staying. So there are career routes through for everybody who's not that, but they do want some of those folks within their organisations. So in order to do that, we've had to organise that, because the normal culture that says, I'm not going to be an entrepreneur, I'm not going to be an entrepreneur, that is fairly well served, or is, you know, not across the world, but within companies that care. But if you happen to be somebody like that, you pretty much, you bounce in and you bounce out. And actually some of the innovation leaves with them, and often they've been setting up as competitors. And so the 27,000 CXOs that I'm working with are saying, I don't want that. I want that talent and that innovation within my company. So what is it about my company that means they won't stay? So that's just, and that has bounced off into Generation Alpha, who work in a completely different way. And so I'm utilising some of that research to see what would we do for them.
The oldest person in Generation Alpha is 10. So we'll have fun working that one.
So my youngest one is 5 I'm working with. So and my first millionaire was 11 when he made his first 16 million.
We may have to come back and do a whole education and do that. I think one of the things that it does is it shows how passionate everybody is, and everybody's looking at these things both on a macro level, on a micro level, on a personal level, and I think there are some key things that come out of all this. You know, diversity and inclusion is a journey. You know, we're certainly not at the final destination. I don't even know if we've got to the first station. I guess we'll be able to look back in 20 years and let everybody know about that. But we're certainly making good progress. There's certainly stuff that can be done. I think one of the things that obviously is driven, is what Nea's saying, is about, you know, having representation at a senior level. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full equal balance. It depends very much on the mixture that you need of the right people for the right job, but having a woman involved or diversity is having a positive impact on the bottom line. And that's obviously going to drive the commercial side of things, and that is an element of the tech industry. I don't think any of us would argue with that, but I think that one of the key fundamental things is around innovation, and I think you have all touched on that, about how important diverse teams are for being innovative. So I'd really like to thank you all. I think we could have probably gone on for a little while longer, and I'm sure you will all be back to either sort of discuss this or stuff that you're also passionate about. But passion is also one of the other things that is the common goal, I think, that you want to see in your organisation, whether you've got 30,000 people like VMware, or you have, you know, somewhat less. You know, maybe we'll speak to you, Nema, and you will also have 30,000, but that may be a couple of
I'm working on it.
Exactly. Come back, watch that space. And you will be joining us again, where we'll take a bit of a deep dive into you specifically and how you came to be one of our winners in the Female Tech Trailblazer this year. So thank you, Nema. Thank you, Jacqui. And thank you, Joe. It has been a fantastic conversation, and really appreciate you all taking the time to share your views, share your experiences, and share your passion for this particular area that's so important to all of us.
It's been great fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. Thanks for the debate, Joe. I can always rely on it.
And that was...
Congratulations again, Nema.
Thank you so much.
Well done.
Fantastic. Well, that's a wrap for the Diversity and Inclusion in the Tech Industry podcast panel. So thanks to our panelists, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon. Thank you.